Probably my mom. My mom was a speech pathologist, and so it's a person who works with stuttering, and a person who works with speech issues. And so if you have an idea in your head, you usually just say it, but someone with a speech issue has an idea in their head and they have trouble saying it, they can't get it out. So my mom was a teacher. She actually just retired this year, which is kind of weird, you know. It's like you're going to grow up and you're going to have all these experiences where you're like, whoa, that just happened. Like you just graduated high school. You're like, wow, I'm out of high school. Like it's surreal. And your parents retiring is kind of one of those things where you're like, no, my parents are supposed to be working, you know. Parents just work and that's just what they do. And so this year she retired and she was a speech pathologist for 30 years in Orange County. And yeah, and so I did a lot of volunteering in her classroom, and I always really liked that. And I mean, I remember even as early as like third grade, my teacher would teach something and then I would imagine how I would teach it. Does anybody do that? Anybody do that? No? Sometimes, yeah. And so it's kind of like, you know, your teacher's teaching you something, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And you're like, if I were to do it, I would turn into this like game. And like, you would kind of like, you know, fantasize about how you would teach it. And like, I did that as early as third grade. And so I have always kind of done that. And I've always really like kind of thought about being a teacher. Like there's never really a doubt in my mind I was going to be a teacher. I don't know, to get the most out of life, I mean, I remember being in high school and coming up with a bucket list before it was called a bucket list. It was just like things I want to do before I die. And it's just like, I don't know, I'm a big believer of my personal philosophy is you should do everything once within moderation, you know? It's like, don't try meth once, you know, that's not good. Don't commit suicide once, you know? It's like, it's not a good idea to try everything once, but that's, I don't know, that's kind of my philosophy is you should try everything. It's so limiting if you know, born and raised in Santa Rosa and you stay in Santa Rosa your whole life, you don't travel anywhere. And then by the time you're 30, it's like, how many states have you been to? 3? And it's kind of like, oh, what's your favorite food? Oh, Mexican, I only eat Mexican food, I don't do anything else. And it's kind of like, you're so limiting because I feel like you don't have a full life. And then all of a sudden you're on your deathbed and you're like, oh man, I wish I did all these kind of things, as opposed to being on your deathbed and being like, yep, I lived a pretty full life, I'm happy. So I'm always trying new things. I'm that kind of guy. It's like, oh, cow tongue is on the menu. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm ordering. I want to try that. I've never had that before. Bull testicles, yeah, let's try that. And they were pretty good, actually. See, you say that, and then I'll just serve it to you and be like, oh, it's carnitas. And then you'll eat it and you're like, oh, it's actually really good. I'm like, oh, good, I'm glad you liked it. It was bull testicles. And it's just funny because, you know, you have those prejudices. It's like when you were a kid, right? And you're like, green, I don't want to eat it. And then you kind of grow up and your taste buds mature and you just try new things and you're like, oh, wow, this is actually really awesome. And so yeah, I love trying new things, and I've been skydiving because it's something I like always wanted to do, and I absolutely loved it. And I was really afraid because I hate roller coasters, and like, you know that stomach up in your head feeling? I hate that. I can't stand it. And the day before I went skydiving, we're in Disneyland. We're on the Tower of Terror. And I was at the top and we're going down. I'm like, I don't want to go skydiving tomorrow. I like didn't want to do it. And I was like, you know, stop being lame, just do it. And so I went there and I was really scared and it was awesome. And I loved it. And if it was cheaper, I would do it all the time. But yeah, it's a totally like different feeling. Like when you skydive, it's just floating. It's kind of crazy. You're just like falling and you're like, oh, huh. And you just kind of like look around and you're like, this is actually really cool. Because when you're going on like a roller coaster, you have the G's pulling against you and that's what gives you that uncomfortable feeling. But when you're skydiving, it's actually really peaceful. Yeah, but it's better though. Because it's like when you're living at home and you're like, you know, you're butting heads with your parents, you have to deal with that every single day because you see them every single day. And even if you're not like best friends with your parents, like it's fine because you grew up, you move on, you know, you get a family, you know, get friends and all that kind of stuff. And then you speak to your parents as often as you want to. And so I speak to my parents roughly now once a week, once every other week. And it's fine because we get these little half an hour phone conversations as opposed to every single day we're dealing with each other face to face. And so your relationship improves. It's kind of like my brother. Oh my God, my brother and I fought all the time. My brother and I are completely opposite. In high school, I listened to Metallica, Linkin Park, like Rob Zombie, Metallica, Tool, I listened to all these like bands. And then my brother listened to like Destiny's Child and Backstreet Boys. And he listened to all these bands. And that was like the perfect opposite of who I was. And so we always butted heads. And then, you kind of grow up, and then he left to college, and then our relationship improved because then you get just a little bit of him. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can deal with this at like a little bit of time. And I know that sounds cold, I guess, but it's really true. And because there's a difference between dealing with someone face to face all the time versus just sporadically. And yeah, so it's just better when it's a little bit of less. Plus, when you grow up, and you become an adult, your parents treat you differently, they look at you differently, and you're more equals as opposed to like when you're a teenager, they're just telling you how it is. So it's different when you're older.
My name is Alfredo Garcia.
My name's Lupe Huerta.
My name is Omar Perez.
My name is Bianca Garcia.
Hi, my name is Ariana Gonzalez.
And my name is Victor Ferrer.